speaking 20 different languages? Is that even possible? It is for polyglot Steve Kaufmann, and in this video he'll tell us what his secret is, if German is really as hard to learn as most people think, and how he ended up hitchhiking to Europe on a German ship at the age of 19. Hello, servus, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Feli. I'm originally from Munich, Germany, but I've been living here in Cincinnati, Ohio, on and off since 2016. And today I have a very special guest joining me. Steve Kaufmann is a polyglot and YouTuber from Canada who speaks about 20 languages, like this many, German being one of them. So yes, we did also speak a little bit of German in this video. And I actually asked you guys on Instagram what you wanted to know from Steve, so let's see what he answered. So Steve, your YouTube channel is called Lingo Steve, and you talk all about language learning on there because you yourself speak a lot of languages. So since I'm assuming a lot of my viewers don't really know who you are, how many languages do you speak, and what's the story behind it?
So first of all, let's put to rest the idea of speaking 20 languages. Obviously, you can't speak 20 languages all at the same level. There's about, say, 12 languages that I could immediately get into a conversation in. For example, German, I would speak with mistakes, but I would understand everything you were saying. I would speak with mistakes, but I'd get my meaning across, perhaps throw in the odd word of Swedish, or whatever, but it works. German is not one of my stronger languages, but it's fine. So there's 12 that are kind of in that state. Let's say the top 5 or 6 I speak very, very well, like French or Japanese or Mandarin or Spanish. Okay. Then I have another eight or so that I have learned. I have learned well enough to use when I was in Czech Republic or Greece and so forth, or even Romania. Even my Farsi isn't too bad, but I can't say that I speak them fluently. So they're in that sort of B1, C2, not A2, B1 area. I should say that when it comes to learning languages, I think to get from a position where you have a lot of words, you can't remember them, you can't retrieve them when you need them, but you can understand 30-40% of normal conversation. To get from there to being fluent is a long road. And if you don't have a real good hold on those languages, then when you don't use them, they kind of, retreat. Whereas in a language like German, for example, because, that's your background, where I have spoken it, I've traveled in Germany, I won't lose very much. I'll become a little more inaccurate, but I won't lose that much.
That makes sense. Okay, well, that's very impressive. So how did that all get started?
Well, it began with French because I got very interested in French when I was like 19 or so. Because of a professor who made French civilization very interesting, whereas the teachers at school had tried to kill any interest we might have in French, right? So once you motivate a learner in the culture, in the history, or could be Japanese anime, as long as you find something that motivates you, then you start learning on your own. Once you learn on your own, you can learn. Everyone can learn. So it started with French. Then as a Canadian government employee or as a trade commissioner, I was sent to Hong Kong to learn Mandarin Chinese, which at first I had no necessarily any particular interest in. But as you get into it, very often as you get into it, the interest, increases. So I then learned Chinese, then I lived in Japan and I learned Japanese. And so once you realize that learning languages is fun, it just takes time, and that you can do it, and that doing it, you learn about the history and the culture of another country, another place, you have a different perspective on the world, then it's something that I enjoy doing. And I do it because I like to explore those cultures largely. German, for example, I once worked on a German ship. I sat there trying to learn the case endings, der, dem, des, and all this, and I couldn't do it. As soon as I abandoned that and just focused in on listening and reading a lot, then my German really improved. Yeah. And then I did a fair amount of business in Germany, so I'd be sitting in the Stau, in the Autobahn with my German agent, and we just talked German. Okay. So you just got to get into the language. Yeah.
That's actually a really good tip with just like sometimes forgetting about all the grammar, because I think a lot of people are standing in their own way a little bit with that, especially with German, because they want to get it perfect every single time. And there's just a point where you just need to be comfortable with making mistakes. You're going to be making mistakes, and you got to rely a little bit on your feeling for the language. So what you just said, I thought that was very interesting.
100%. The sad fact is that most people, certainly for me, I can study those tables and think I'm learning something, but I'm not learning anything. And the next time I go to speak German, I'll get them wrong. And so the only way to start getting them gradually more and more correct is if you develop these natural habits that, because you got to deal with gender and you got to deal with case. It's impossible to remember those things. But after a while, having heard them so often and used them so often, you start to get better and better. And that's it. And it shouldn't stand in the way of communicating. It doesn't stand in the way of comprehension. It shouldn't stand in the way of you expressing yourself. And no German is going to get mad at you because you use the wrong case ending.
Exactly, 100%. I'm interesting what you just said about the German ship. What kind of ship was that? Was it a cruise ship or how did you end up there?
Well, no, that's a long story. So when I was 19 in Montreal, I actually had been working on a construction site, and I was laid off because they finished that site. So I went down to the dock, and for 3 consecutive days, I asked to speak to the captain of all these ships in the port of Montreal. I said, I would like to work my way across to Europe. And on the 3rd day, there was a relatively small German steamer. I still remember the name, Gerda Schell it was called, out of Flensburg. And the captain says, yeah, you can work. We lost one of our sailors jumped ship in Quebec. Well, just ran away in Quebec City. So we need a guy. And so it was a small ship. The crew was half German, half Spanish. And so at night, after spending the day pounding rusty metal, I would sit there, try to, memorize these case ending, these tables, and it never worked. But hitchhiking in Germany, trying to talk to people, and then eventually when in the 90s, and of course I took a month off between jobs, and I said, I got to get at this German. And so I went to the secondhand bookstores in Vancouver, and any book I could find that was German with vocabulary behind each chapter. And I bought all these secondhand books. Some of them had little scribblings on them and stuff. And I just did a lot of reading.
Okay.
I found cassette tapes back in in those days, in the late 80s, cassette tapes of interviews and from German radio and stuff. It's just listening and reading. And once you have a sense of how the language goes, then you can look at the rules, and you still won't remember them, but that's kind of the order,
Yeah. That's the German word of Sprachgefühl. Is like, I feel like in English.
Yeah, Sprachgefühl, yeah.
Is there a translation for that?
You could say if there, you get a feeling for the language.
Yeah.
I like to use the word familiarity. You have to develop a familiarity with the language, get used to the language, develop some habits in the language.
Yeah.
So you can call that Sprachgefühl.
Yeah, that's what we always say.
But there's no
German, yeah.
exact equivalent in English.
Yeah.
Feeling for the language.
I did ask my followers on Instagram what questions they had for you. And one of the first questions that came up was, do you have a favorite language? And if so, what is it?
I don't. And I like different languages for different reasons. I like languages, any of these languages, because of their association with their respective cultures. Japanese has this sort of constantly, it's sort of like, how would you say it? There's this space, this unspoken space, or this indirect nature of communication. And then at the other end, you have the French, who try to be so logical in the way they present their ideas. And the Germans with their more long-winded sentences, although that's, I gather, less and less the case. Every language has things that I find appealing. So I don't have a favorite language.
Okay. I mean, I wouldn't have expected that, honestly, but I had to ask the question. Now, another question, of course, related to German. You already kind of mentioned it. There's all the articles, the cases. A lot of people are thrown off by that. A lot of people who try to learn German or, have already started a little bit, but then they feel like, oh, it's too complicated. They also get thrown off by the pronunciation on top of that. And a lot of people just think or say that German is a very difficult language to learn. Now, you're actually someone who can compare that to other languages. So what's the truth from your experience? Where does German really rank on the list of the most difficult languages to learn? Is it even up there?
No. What makes languages difficult? First of all, writing system, number one. For me to learn, say, Chinese characters, I had to learn about 4,000 Chinese characters.
Yeah, that's a whole different thing.
That's a whole different thing. Japanese with the hiragana, Korean, or now trying to learn Persian and Arabic. We read so much in our own language or in our own writing system that we're so familiar with it. So anytime I can read in the Latin alphabet, it's much easier.
Yeah.
Even Slavic languages. I speak Russian much better than Czech. But if I can read Czech written in the Latin alphabet, it's always easier. So number one, German is written in the Latin alphabet. Second thing that makes languages difficult is vocabulary. So if you have, even where, like Finnish has no common vocabulary with English, so it becomes more difficult. Turkish, the same way. But German has a lot of common vocabulary.
That's true. Yep.
I don't know whether it has more common vocabulary than French. They're both up there. So you've got same writing system, lots of common vocabulary. The grammar is a little more finicky, but not as bad as the Slavic languages. The pronunciation, right now, because I'm going to go to Sweden and Denmark, I'm listening to an audiobook on the history of Denmark. You want to talk about difficult to pronounce is Danish. But eventually, if you listen to it often enough, you slowly get better at it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the case with, you have to enjoy the Deutsch. Jetzt werden wir Deutsch sprechen. And you got to get into it and enjoy it,
Got to embrace the harsh consonants.
You got it. It's not so harsh anyway, but you got to embrace it, have fun with it, play with it. And I don't think it's particularly difficult.
Okay. So it's...
pronunciation in Chinese, you got tones to worry about.
Yep,
so,
that's true.
Not so difficult.
Not even like among the top 5 then?
No. The key thing is motivation.
Yeah.
So motivation is driven by your inherent interest in the language, history, literature, people, friends, whatever, and the availability of learning material. And German is one of those languages where there is a lot of material available. German is one of the languages where there are lots of audiobooks. And you can usually find the text somewhere. Either you pay for an ebook, or I don't mind 19th century literature, and you can find stuff free on, Gutenberg. But if you pay for an audiobook, you pay $20 or euro or whatever for an audiobook and an ebook, which is what I did for both Polish and Danish now. Yeah, that's good for, a month. So German, in that sense, is rich. And not to mention German podcasts, German TV programs. So there's no shortage of material for people wanting to learn German.
That's good. Let's stay on that topic, because that was the second most asked question that I had, of course, is what are your tips for learning German? You already just mentioned a few, but maybe you have a few more.
Okay, so now when I start a new language, I would always spend the first 3 months with the mini stories that we have at Link, because there's 60 stories with a lot of repetition. In each story, the same story is told from a different point of view in a different tense, and questions are asked, and you get affirmative answer, negative answer. So you deal with all the different a lot of the same vocabulary is repeated. It's just a good way to get started. So I would typically spend 3 months. If it's Arabic, it'll take longer. And then I go looking for authentic content.
Okay.
Or if there's intermediate content, like for French, there's Français Authentique. There are a bunch of podcasts out there where people talk to people, because any casual conversation is going to be easier in terms of vocabulary than, say, a book or novel, which has much more low frequency vocabulary.
Yeah.
So if you can find podcasts, and if you don't know how to look, then just, go to Google Translate and punch in whatever it is you're interested in English or your native language. It could be, maybe you're looking for an ebook on German history, on the Weimar Republic, on Beethoven, whatever you want, punch it in English, and you're looking for a PDF file, or you're looking for an audiobook, ebook. Up comes something, put it in your search engine, and you'll find a lot of material that you can then go to. You can also search on YouTube. Anything that's on YouTube that has subtitles in the language, so German subtitles for a German YouTube video. Maybe it could be a German TV program or anything. If there are German subtitles, that with one click can be imported into Link, so that you then have the audio file and you have the text as a lesson that you can look up words and phrases. So I think the progression is from something basic, like our mini stories, or starter book, living life, teach yourself, assimil, whatever. And then you've got to push yourself towards more demanding material, more demanding, but also more interesting. Because after a while, you can't be just deliberately learning the language. You actually want to get to where you're interested in things to keep you interested, because it takes a long time. And you keep on forgetting the same words. And so if you're interested in what you're listening to, then you'll continue doing it.
That's a really good tip.
If that makes sense.
Okay, so let's do a quick German section. I'm going to add subtitles for my viewers. auf Deutsch.
Ja.
Du hattest ja schon gesagt, dass du auch Zeit in Deutschland verbracht hast. In welchen deutschsprachigen Ländern warst du überall? Also warst du nur in Deutschland oder auch woanders? Und wie war da so deine Erfahrung mit der Kultur auch?
Aber meistens war ich in Deutschland. Ich habe dort Geschäft gemacht. Ich habe Holz verkauft in Deutschland und war oft mit meinem Agent auf die Autobahn und oft im Stau. Dann haben wir sehr viel Deutsch gesprochen.
Das klingt sehr typisch deutsch.
Stau.
Ja, Teil unserer Kultur.
Aber ich war auch ein bisschen in Österreich und in der Schweiz, aber meistens in Deutschland. Und ich habe einen sehr guten, Eindruck davon. Die Leute waren sehr nett. Ich habe sehr gern die kleinen Dörfer in Deutschland. Diese Gaststätte sind sehr bequem, gemütlich. Also ich glaube, es gibt Leute, die glauben, dass die Deutschen sind ein bisschen kalt oder so. Für mich nicht. Immer sehr freundlich auf die, keine Probleme.
Das ist doch schön.
Und auch in Deutschland, man sagt sehr oft das, ja, ich habe Deutsch gelernt und dann, wenn ich in Deutschland war, dann die Leute haben immer auf Englisch geantwortet. Ich habe das manchmal, weil die Leute, sie wollen, wie sagt man, ich weiß nicht, vielleicht ist es mehr bequem für diese Leute, aber meistens mit mir haben auch auf Deutsch gesprochen und
Okay.
Es war keine negative Erfahrung.
Sehr cool.
Erfahrungen.
Ja,
Erfahrungen.
Erfahrungen, genau, ja. Das gibt's auf jeden Fall ganz viel. Das wird mir auch immer wieder gesagt, dass in Deutschland einfach, vor allem in den Städten natürlich, also ich komme ja aus München, also schon eine sehr große Stadt, wo irgendwie fast jeder eigentlich ein bisschen Englisch spricht. Und vor allem dann im Kundenservice oder so, wenn jemand versucht, Deutsch zu sprechen und man merkt, die Person tut sich ein bisschen schwer oder die hat einen sehr starken Akzent, dann ist es einfach oft, glaube ich, dass die Deutschen denken, sie tun der Person jetzt einen Gefallen, wenn sie auf Englisch wechseln. Einfach um die Konversation zu erleichtern, um der Person entgegenzukommen, weil wir uns auch oft sehr schlecht fühlen, dass Deutsch ja eben so schwer zu lernen ist. Also denken wir ja oft als Deutsche. Und natürlich für die Leute, die eigentlich ihr Deutsch üben wollen, ist das oft gar nicht so förderlich. Und es ist eigentlich, viele fühlen sich da auch so ein bisschen auf den Schlips getreten, sagt man. Also what's the English word for that? Stepped on their toes. Dass die Person automatisch davon ausgeht, dass das Deutsch eben nicht gut genug ist. Wie war denn dann deine Erfahrung mit den verschiedenen Dialekten? Weil wenn du sagst, dass du auch in Österreich warst und in der Schweiz, vor allem Schweizerdeutsch, Schweizerdeutsch, ist ja schon noch mal was ganz anderes. Wie bist du da klargekommen?
Also in der Schweiz, alle sprechen sehr gut Deutsch, also Hochdeutsch. Ich verstehe nicht Schweizerdeutsch, also ein bisschen aber nein, hauptsächlich nicht. In Österreich ist kein Problem, das ist Deutsch, aber mit wernerischem Akzent oder etwas, aber ich verstehe.
Okay.
Keine große Problem. Schwaben oder ist immer ein bisschen unterschiedlich, aber und die Leute, sie versuchen also normale, neutralische Deutsch zu sprechen mit mir.
Klar.
Ne?
Okay, sehr gut. Also du hattest dann jetzt in Deutschland, Österreich und der Schweiz nicht wirklich so einen Culture Shock, also Kulturschock-Moment oder sowas?
Kein Kulturschock.
Und bei dir ist es ja auch so ein bisschen in der Familie, ne? Also habe ich gelesen, dass deine Eltern ja auch zu Hause Deutsch gesprochen haben, oder?
Also sie sind aus der Tschechoslowakei, aus Mähren. Und sie haben beide, also auch Deutsch und Tschechisch zu Hause gesprochen. Aber mit uns immer auf Englisch. Und deswegen, ich habe Deutsch gehört, aber nie gelernt. Und ich glaube, das hat geholfen, dass ich, also einfacher Deutsch, also es war einfacher für mich, Deutsch zu lernen, weil ich habe das gehört als Kind.
Ja, das kann ich mir gut vorstellen. Okay, then let's switch back to English.
Well, one thing I should say, I think culture is important, and culture in a broad sense. Like, you don't have to read Goethe, right? You have to, at some point, develop a sense of affinity, a sense of affection for the language, the culture, the people, the language you want to learn. And sometimes it isn't there at the beginning, and as you get more and more involved, that affection grows. As they say in French, l'appétit vient en mangeant. So you have to give yourself a chance. So don't treat the language as simply a subject like mathematics. It's actually engaging with another culture, imitating an aspect of that other culture.
Yep.
So you kind of have to like it. You have to find something to like.
Yeah, I totally agree. I also personally feel like that I have slightly different personalities, and that's kind of connected through the language, because the language is connected through the culture. So to me, English is closely connected with North American culture, because that's where I mostly have been speaking it, and German obviously with my home country, Germany, because obviously people speak German in other parts of the world as well, but that's what I associated with. And then I find myself automatically act differently whenever I switch languages. Like I code switch in my manners and my personality and my gestures and those kinds of things. Do you find yourself having different personalities in those different languages?
Oh, I think so. And it's difficult to judge yourself. But yeah, obviously, because the patterns of the language are somewhat different. If I compare, say, when I speak a language, I try to become that person, a Frenchman, a Chinese person, a Japanese person, whatever. And so, yeah, you do. The core of who we are doesn't change, but superficially, some of our mannerisms, some of the way we present our thoughts will change. I would even think that having exposed myself to the French way of thinking, because I did my university training in France, having exposed myself to 9 years of living in Japan, all of this also changes us. These become a part of how we use language per se. We are then permanently influenced by having learned these languages. So it's not just that I changed personality, but my personality has grown a bit larger, call it.
Yeah.
More kind of universal.
Yeah.
Just as when we learn more languages, we are better at hearing different sounds, because we now incorporate more sounds in and more ways of saying things in the range of what's possible in language. So yeah, it changes you in many ways.
Yeah, that's definitely my experience too. I mean, I don't speak that many different languages. I really only speak German and English fluently. And then I used to study French in school. I had 6 or 7 years of French. And I now find myself that I can still understand a whole lot. But what you said at the beginning with like the active and passive vocabulary, I have no active vocabulary anymore. I can understand a whole lot, but when I try to form a sentence, only German and English pops into my head. And the French words are just not readily available for me. So I don't really have a personality in French, but I definitely am much more outgoing when I speak English. Even if I'm in Germany and I interact with people in English, I'm much more outgoing. I exaggerate more, which is an attribute that a lot of people say the American culture has, that people just exaggerate a lot and use adjectives that are a little bit over the top. And in German, I'm just a little bit more down to earth, realistic. I'll say things like, da kann man nicht meckern, like you can't complain about that, and that's a compliment for Germans. Whereas if you said that in English, that would be kind of like a pretty bad thing to say. That would basically be a sugar-coated, oh, that was pretty bad. So that's definitely something that I experience.
Yeah, no, that's true, but I find that it carries over. Like the Japanese are more understated. They don't say, my product is the best. They say, I can do that, no problem. They don't say that. They say, I'll give it a try. I'll try. And I think that carries over. Those are cultural aspects that I have kind of incorporated so that I try not to oversell. Whereas the normal practice, certainly in North America, but in a lot of sort of even Western compared to Japanese, is to oversell. And the Japanese understate. And those things then become one of the things that you pick up.
Has there ever been a language that you gave up on, that you tried and it was just too much?
Let's say there are languages that are permanent works in progress, like Korean or Arabic. It has to do either with the inherent difficulty of the language, which isn't the case with Korean, but it has to do with the difficulty of finding really compelling content to learn from. Arabic it's a can of worms because you've got standard Arabic, Egyptian Arabic, Levantine Arabic. So, you learn the standard Arabic, but then if you watch a TV program from Lebanon or a movie from Egypt, you don't understand it. So, okay, I'm going to learn that variant. And it's just endless. But I enjoy it, so it doesn't matter. I'll keep at it.
So the answer would be no. You've never fully given up on a language.
Never given it up, but I leave it for a while. And then once I get motivated, I go back to it again.
Thank you, Steve, for this great conversation and for sharing all of these amazing tips with us. We also filmed a video for his channel that's already up. I'll put the link up here for you and in the info box below. And to be completely honest with you, that conversation actually went a little bit differently than I initially expected, and I somehow ended up sharing some pretty personal stories about dating and my experiences with ghosting in the US. So if you want to hear all about that, make sure to check out the video on Steve's channel. And also make sure to check out Steve's language platform Link that he briefly mentioned earlier. They have a huge library of language courses and other content in many different languages. So it's a great place to get started on your language learning journey or just immerse yourself a little bit more. Now, of course, I'd also like to hear your guys' experiences and comments on this topic. Have you ever tried learning a second language? And if so, what were the biggest challenges for you? And do you have any tips for overcoming those challenges? Put it in the comments below. A huge thank you again to Steve for being on my channel today. If you guys enjoyed this video, please make sure to hit the thumbs up button. Don't forget to subscribe and of course, check out Steve's channel, Lingo Steve, as well. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching and I hope I'll see you next time. Tschüss!